Consider following my Twitter because these cool people do, but aside from that, let's get straight onto the guide. Ashe's primary weapon, the B-Tech Peacekeeper, makes Ashe fire semi-automatic shots dealing 75 damage per shot every 0.65 seconds, paired with a fall-off range starting at 30 meters alongside a 25% movement penalty. Ashe can also unscope to fire quick shots every 0.25 seconds dealing 40 damage, with an increasing spread after firing 3 shots. As a preface, since Ashe's kit is very similar to heroes I've already done such as McCree, Widowmaker and Hanzo, a lot of the concepts from those guides will carry over to Ashe. Starting off with a bit of micro to do with breakpoints. On Ashe, you are no longer able to 2-shot any 200 HP squishy hero with a headshot into body shot combo without any damage amplifiers. However, you are still able to do this against Widowmaker as she has only 175 HP, but due to factors such as fall off range and Widowmaker's slender hitbox, in order to pull this off, try and force the duel when having a shorter sightline as I explain later on. With Ashe's unscoped shots, you primarily use this in close quarter combat to maximize survivability, as Jin explains here.
Staying scoped in, yes, it will allow you to get the headshot in those regards, but is the headshot actually required to kill them? No. So it's much more important to actually prioritize your own survivability and enter into evasive movement, basically. AD spam, looking left, right during reloads and whatnot, but just like spraying them or whatnot, it will do less damage, assuming that you would have otherwise hit the scoped shot. But since you have teammates' assistance anyway, if you are standing still, it makes it much easier for McCree to burst you with 170. Instantaneous damage by just shooting you in the head and punching you if you're hard scoped in. So that's why in close quarters, it's not that GM and pro Widowmakers can't hit those shots. It's that the risk of them getting shot and bursted through heals, through supports and whatnot is too big of a risk to take. So in close quarters, store your ego and just SMG them to death and then teabag.
One thing to mention is that despite the fact that spamming unscoped shots has a higher DPS than normally shooting, the inconsistent spread, alongside your limited ammo, paired with your fall-off range starting at 20 meters instead of 30, if you are going to be using Ashe just to spam shots, you might as well be playing Soldier, McCree or Bastion. A fundamental with Ashe is to time your angled pressure on the enemy team for when your team pushes in. For instance, on Junkertown first point attack, you could take the high ground surrounding your team or push left side. Make sure that when you do this though, that you have good corner discipline, as Spalno explains here.
Why the heck do you peek this wide? The second you peek this here, the Zenyatta is already visible. You don't need to go anymore. Because the reason cover's good is it doesn't stop you from being shot. It stops you from being killed. Because if I'm shot here, I can go, oh, I need to move over. But because it's an extra quarter of a second to move over, and then I will receive a second shot potentially and die. Whereas if I get shot here, the only thing that can kill me are one shots. So it's not just about the risk of death. It's the fact that the risk of death makes you run away like a pig when you could have just stayed here and continually apply pressure. You increase the longevity of the pressure here. What benefit do you get from being here as opposed to being here? In fact, it's worse offensively. This isn't about playing more aggressive. This is about playing worse. You want to do more damage? You want to get more picks? You want to be aggressive? Play aggressive here. Play aggressive here. This is good aggressive. This is bad aggressive because you're not doing more damage. You will do less damage, get fewer kills, and die more.
Another key nuance to this is to maintain longer sightlines to fit the range of your gun, hence why you aren't pushing right side, as Spilo elaborates on here.
The problem is that we're putting out pressure in a location, in a proximity that's not favorable for us against a composition like a Reinhardt Zarya and against a McCree. In addition, this makes no sense when you have a better, safer high ground angle like this that we literally just leveraged and won the fight with the previous fight. And now we're sitting on the floor. This is so much safer and more aggressive up here. Other heroes wish they could wall climb up here and utilize this, and yet you're here. And now you're there, and now you're in spawn.
A key nuance to this would be playing up against a Widowmaker, who is greatly favoured at longer ranges due to her lack of fall-off and one-shot capability. Referring back to Junkertown, if the enemy team are on Widow, it would be more appropriate to take the shorter sightline flank to the right, where you have the duel advantage. Speaking about these sniper duels, here's Irostox explaining how you should force advantageous duels, giving some examples of the advantages at play.
You never want to take a fair fight, right? You always want to have an advantage when you go for 1v1. For example, you get the jump on someone, right? You get the first shot without them noticing you. The advantage could be positional. So for example, if you have high ground, that's a positional advantage. You have your ultimate, that's an advantage. You can have someone pocketing you. That's an advantage, right? There's also peeker's advantage, because obviously you know when you peek, but the enemy doesn't know when you peek, which means that you're gonna have an advantage in terms of reaction time. So if we look at this 1v1, there's two outcomes. Either you use your ultimate here and the enemy Widowmaker doesn't hide, in which case you can peek her and kill her because you have a very, very big advantage. You have peeker's advantage, you have high ground advantage, and you have wallhack advantage. Or she doesn't peek you, which means that for the entire duration of your ultimate, the enemy Widowmaker and the enemy Ashe are going to be completely useless.
However, arguably, the biggest advantage that you can take in the sniper duel is to reposition against the enemy sniper, timed for when your tanks are baiting attention, as Spinal gives an example of here.
How is this shot so quote-unquote easy? Positioning and timing. His positioning here, high ground, angle, Ashe doesn't see him, perfect. Timing, perfect also. You looked right as the enemy team was committing, so they're not looking at you, they're looking at your tank line, and so that makes it an easy shot.
Some exceptions that may want you to re-peek would be if you gain Infosight, or with Coach Gun, as I'll explain later on. Building off that timing concept mentioned there at the end, here's Stocks once again explaining the timing factor of your angle taking.
Why do you peek this early?
I think I maybe thought that I could get a pick.
Even if you get a pick, can you just run on the point? You need to wait for your teammates anyways. So there's two reasons why peeking here is bad. First of all, even if you get the pick, no one is there to follow up. Your team is still in spawn. Your diva literally just died. Reason number two, there's no one applying pressure on the enemy team, right? So as I mentioned earlier, you always want to look for advantageous fights. The enemy Widowmaker, right? She can't spend all of her time looking for you. Once your teammates engage, she has to shoot your teammates. If she just keeps searching for you, then she's useless. When your teammates go in, they're going to draw attention of the enemy Widowmaker, and that's when you can peek. Right here, and do you see where the enemy Widowmaker is looking? So this is much better, because now she's distracted. Now she needs to decide what she wants to do. Is she going to deal with you? Is she going to focus your teammates, etc.?
To go on that even further, the same applies if you peek too late, and this is often why you'll see Ashe players catch one or two enemies after the teamfight has happened, which would have been much more useful during the team fight when tanks can follow up. Moving on to some mechanical play, here's Spinal going over some fundamental crosshair placement which can be carried over to other snipers.
You're putting the crosshair off of where you need it to be. I'm not sure why. Like, I can understand that the height maybe, because you're still going to headshot her from this height. Why is it off to the side? Why is it not directly on the corner? I mean, your crosshair placement, it wasn't even a flick there. You just put your crosshair off of the position where it needed to be. You had all the time in the world to line up your shot, and you still missed.
If you want to improve your aim and practice this crosshair placement, I recommend doing some Tryhard FFA, as it has good generalizability to actual in-game experiences, and aim trainers on console just aren't a thing. Lastly, as Ashe reloads bullet by bullet instead of via a magazine, make sure that in between fights, you constantly reload in order to have as much ammo as possible during the team fights. Ashe's first ability, the Pyro Storm Dynamite, makes Ashe throw some explosive dynamite dealing up to 50 damage on explosion with a 5 meter radius, with 100 burn damage occurring over the following 5 seconds alongside a 12-second cooldown. The fundamental use behind Ashe's dynamite is to both set it in a position where it hits as many enemies as possible and to time it for when your frontline can make use of it, as Spinal explains here.
So the positioning of the dynamite is poor. It's directly in front of the Rhine shield when you're about to reposition yourself to where you can land a bigger, fatter dynamite in the backline. Just dynamite as many people as you can, or dynamite somebody in a good position. That's it. It's a little early, right? Your team can't really get anything out of this. If the Rhines are swinging and you land a big dynamite, a little bit more valuable, right? So you kind of have to find a balance of, I'm going to spam dynamite off of cooldown versus I'm going to use dynamites in the best opportunity. And right now, you could probably wait like literally 2 seconds and get a better dynamite because you'd be in a better position and you do it at a time where the Rhines are actually swinging on each other. It'd be like landing a big nade here. Could your team really follow up off of it? No, and then the team's going to push immediately afterwards and you're not going to have your nade. Can you imagine if he had dynamite here? You might lose this fight because this McCree on it don't die, and you look back and go, oh, that was unlucky, you know, my team just died really fast. No, if you'd had dynamite here, this McCree on it dies instantly. And so you get 2 kills where you would have only gotten 1.
Spino briefly mentioned dynamiting someone in a good position, which, linking back to the concept of forcing an advantageous duel, can be used to give you the opportunity to one-shot someone as you utilize the AoE area to land some early damage in before even peeking. For instance, on Nabani first point defense, you can detonate your dynamite from the high ground to the corner without having to peek, landing in some early damage to allow you to go past your one-shot breakpoint. Dynamite should also be used 10 to 12 seconds before the team fight begins to gain some early ult charge. Make sure that it is 10 to 12 seconds since you want dynamite for when the fight begins. Aside from that, there isn't too much else to Ashe's dynamite. Ashe's second ability, the B.O.B grappling hook, makes Ashe blast enemies in front of her, propelling herself up to 9.4 meters away with a 10-second cooldown. The fundamental use to Ashe's coach gun is to use it defensively when getting dove. However, you may want to coach gun to another piece of high ground instead of coach gunning away immediately. For instance, on Temple of Anubis point A defense, you could drop off high ground and coach gun midair to land on the other high ground. I wouldn't recommend doing this if you need to run away as quickly as possible, but if there's one dive target on you, you can take your time. With coach gun, you can also detonate your dynamite, hence if you can't get a good angle for your dynamite aggressively, you can use both defensively to to land some damage in whilst you're kiting. This is best done when there are multiple targets diving you. Lastly, you may use your coach gun similarly to Widow's grapple in terms of doing a hook shot. Referring back to forcing advantageous duels, this can provide you with a movement advantage making you harder to hit, likewise with this Nimbani example. Here's Barlow explaining this further.
As I'm grappling, I already have my crosshair lined up where she is, right? You can have it pre-aimed as you're grappling up, and you know exactly where she is. Meanwhile, this Widow, this is what this Widow sees. Come on, peek me again, I dare you. Wait, what the heck? Like right there. And you see that time of where she has to react and move her crosshair up to here. That's the advantage that I get.
And obviously, use coach gun to gain high grounds when possible. Ashe's ultimate, the Butler Bot, makes Ashe summon her Omnic sidekick with 1200 HP, charging as enemies, dealing 120 damage on impact, with an arm cannon dealing 112 DPS, and lasts for 10 seconds after collision. B.O.B is one of the simplest ultimates to use, as you almost always want to put B.O.B on a greedy off angle, as Buff Hardtack explains here.
Where do you place B.O.B? To understand this, you have to understand the concept of crossfire. Essentially, you should be trying to shoot the enemy team from as many different angles as possible to deny them cover. We're being shot at from here! We're being shot at from here! We're being shot at from here! If you're the enemy team, where do you hide? How do you deal with that? To get that sort of chaos installed into the enemy team, you should almost always, without exception, place B.O.B on a flank, or even better, on the back line. Where are they going to hide from you? Where are they going to hide from your team, your gun, and B.O.B at the same time? Nowhere.
A visual example of doing this would be on Nimbani's second point attack, where you send B.O.B in the backline where he has a wide LOS onto the enemy team. One additional thing to mention is to time your B.O.Bs for when your team or when the enemy team engages, so that your B.O.B doesn't get immediately focused down before the team fight even begins. Moving on to the positioning, playstyle, and compositional part of this guide. In terms of general positioning, there are 4 key principles which I'll showcase on Hanamo's second attack. The first is to have cover, pretty simple. The second is to have line of sight, which is again pretty simple. The third is to have good distance from angles, so that the enemy flankers don't sneak up on you. The fourth and final guideline is to have aggressive and defensive rotations to exert more pressure on the enemy team or to just escape. In Brawl, the fundamentals of having longer sightlines and taking greedy angles are vital. For instance, on Lijiang Control Center, you should split close-side in order to gain an aggressive, long-range angle that the enemy team can't contest while still being in range to land a juicy dynamite. You should time this just after your tanks engage, since the enemy team will be fully focused on your core, making your angle more unpredictable and unexpected. In Poke, longer sightlines and well-timed angles are again the key to succeeding with this composition. For instance, on Blizzard World first attack, you could peek the right side angle whilst the front line is basing attention, providing you with an angle and a decently ranged sightline onto their Ashe alongside a juicy dynamite onto their core. Note that you don't want to be playing too far away that you can't land any dynamites, but not too close that the Sigma or McCree can shut you down. Another example will be on Hanamo's second point attack, where you dynamite past their shields and start taking a wider angle closer to the coast to apply more pressure. However, when playing against double shield variations that play a tracer who can mark especially greedy and wide angles, you should be hesitant of splitting this wide and make sure you are in LOS of your backline. In Dive, when playing defensively, you don't want to play stacked, but you also don't want to play isolated, as Barlow explains here.
You don't want to position on top of the team because it allows the enemy team to be able to dive you without taking damage, because there's only one LOS where you're actually putting damage. Like we could draw a straight line of where this damage is coming from, and it's here. They can hide from this damage in here, they can hide from the damage here, they can hide from the damage here, they can hide from the damage here. Whereas if you position just slightly here, not too much, where you can still be Harmony Orbed, Armor Pack, you can poke this pre-jump, this pre-jump, this pre-jump, this no longer has cover, this no longer has cover, this has significantly less cover, this has significantly less cover, and you can even peek down this hallway a little bit easier. Dive wants to corral you. Stacking against Dive is not the answer. It is being in positions where you can peel for each other, but you can poke out Dive before the fight happens. So you don't want to be isolated, but you don't want to be stacked.
However, when aggressing in Dive, you want an angle and a long sightline onto the Killbox or area to where your team is diving on, as Barlow explains here.
Multiple angles and longer sightlines. And obviously high ground is good too. So you could be here still holding high ground, right? But you can also be set up, have another angle set up here for spam as well, because it's also a very long sightline and you've got cover. With Dive, you might have guys more in deep and high and sneaking here, but with spam, you might have an angle here and an angle here. And so where would your kill box be then? Where are those angles? Where do those guys have really good LOS? This is where spam is going to get the best sightline, right? From this high ground and from that sightline. It's going to be about right here, a little bit past the choke.
Another visual example of this would be on Temple of Anubis' second point defense, where your kill box is the enemy rotation into cave, and you have a long sightline and an angle on that kill box, likewise with your dive crew. Well, that's the guide. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and if this video helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time.
And I say, hey, living like we're